Hey everyone, welcome back to The Move, where we're vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that time in the Bible where Adam and Eve have a conversation with a talking snake. If you're wondering where in the world this is, we're talking about Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 13. My guest for today's episode is the one, the only Pastor Jonathan Leonardo. Yeah, there it is. How's that feel?
You're a troll, bro.
We were talking before the recording how you did not expect this to be the case, but God moves in mysterious ways, to use the cliche, and now you're a pastor.
No, I'm a pastor, but I know that you're just trolling super hard. Pastor Jonathan.
I got my credentials, and technically I'm also a pastor from one of those like Universalist churches.
Universal
online,
Life Church.
That's the one, so I can do marriages and stuff like that. So it's funny. Anyways, we're talking about the fall today. We're talking about the talking snake, Adam and Eve, eating the fruit, so to speak. And I don't know, like it seems so like brain dead obvious now. It's like, bro, it's a talking snake. Snakes aren't supposed to talk. What do you do when talking to a snake? And I don't know. I just facepalm is like all I can think about as I read the story now. But that's probably not what it was like reading it back then or in the original moment. I'm sure it was not so crazy.
No, there's a lot that we miss again when we don't know the text. We don't read it closely. And one of the ways is that we miss a little bit with the language, right? So now I'm doing some callback here, but if I remember right, the word here for the serpent is nahash, right? Nahash, I believe. And depending on, it could take several forms. It could be a verbal form. It could be a noun form. And certainly it refers to a serpent, but it also can refer to a serpentine figure, right? So not just simply a serpent in the 2021 understanding of a serpent, like an anaconda in the Amazon where it's slithering. Sure. And if you get into the water, it's going to eat you up. Or the sort of trope where there's like these slithering, sly, cunning serpent that is, trying to strategize and
like in the Jungle Book.
Yeah, right. When he's going around Mowgli. It's more or less. If you look at the word and you look at the intertextuality of this word nahash, there's a serpentine figure or a shining bright one can be another way to understand it. And when you look at the context of Genesis 1 and how it relates to other narratives of the creation story and other sort of mythological elements that exist in the time of which the Bible's written, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about, this is for my theology nerds, for the ancient Near East, right? Which is the ancient
Mesopotamia,
Israel, northern Egypt. Like there is a plethora of creation stories and there is a plethora of like divine beings that exist. And one of them is this Nahash, this serpentine figure that is a shining bright one that looks something along the lines of what we would call a serpent, but is also very beautiful to look at. It's colorful. In some depictions, it has wings. In some depictions, like the one in the Bible, it speaks. So it's not just a symbol of evil cunning in the way that you and I understand that you come to a tree and there's a serpent and you have to take care, right? That's an actual outgrowth.
They wouldn't have been scared per se, according to the traditions.
No, the story here is one that it presents this shining bright figure, right? That is serpentine in nature. And we related it to the serpent, but that is also quite possibly some sort of being that belongs to the supernatural realm, right? So that when it speaks, it's not surprising because it's not a being that may or may not actually primarily belong to the world, right?
To the earth.
To the earth, right? In the sense that you and I are proper to the earth as humans, right? And that's not far flung in this story because when you read Genesis 3, 1 through 13, you see that God comes in after the proverbial fall. God shows up and he talks to Adam and Eve. God is not proper to the earth, right?
Right.
God precedes. He is, everlasting from everlasting. So the world that this story exists in is an enchanted world that actually has beings that can come in that aren't proper to earth and actually have interaction with Adam and Eve is a bit of the backdrop of where these 13 verses take place. And it's helpful to understand that this serpent is not just merely a garden snake, that it is maybe some serpentine figure that actually is understood to be maybe a participant of the divine supernatural realm that then Adam and Eve actually have interaction with.
So what I'm hearing is that we have clear divisions now between the natural world and the supernatural, whether your belief in the supernatural or not, whatever. But like we have a clear division that there are things that we can expect and things that are kind of supernatural, hence the term supernatural. But life before the fall, that line maybe didn't exist at all, that there was kind of a coming and a going maybe between beings from other worlds or other realms. Clearly God's showing up, and that wasn't surprising to Adam and Eve. And so there's this idea, and we get the sense that I think it's in Daniel, it's in Ezekiel, it's in Revelation. There's clearly beings from other worlds, obviously angels, but there's also other kinds of weird looking things that don't seem to be necessarily demonic by nature. And whether or not Adam and Eve knew about the quote unquote demonic or not, the point is that they were expecting, or that it wasn't abnormal for them to have conversation with divine beings.
Yeah, and even that usage of demons might be a misnomer in light of the enchanted world, precisely because there are a number of classifications in the Old Testament of beings, so that it's not just simply angelic cherubs, little white babies with wings, and then on the other side you have your little demons that are imps, cloven hooved and imps, and they have some sort of red skin with tails, right? Like this is very much a medieval and more a way later development. But in the ancient Near East, in this text, in this story here, there is a sort of taxonomy of beings. And in that taxonomy of beings, there are beings that are proper to the supernatural realm, and they have all sorts of different functions. And demons might be a catch-all phrase for supernatural beings or that are evil in nature. But even that is a bit shortchanging it. But what we have here is an enchanted world where this serpentine figure exists, so that when Eve comes up to the tree, in the story, and with this as backdrop, it's not surprising that Eve can have a conversation.
So this kind of context is really interesting, because the idea of the promise or the kind of the allure of the offer of this serpentine figure is that you will have your eyes open, you'll be like God. Yeah. And when I just think about the taxonomy of beings, is just there's humanity, there's maybe angels, and then there's God. And it's like, okay, that's like a really lofty, I don't know, maybe it sounds crazy, but it changes in my mind, and I'm trying to distill like how it changes. But to know that there's multiple layers and many different types of beings that are out there, the offer to become like gods, I feel like there's something that's being offered here that is missed in my modern reading of the text.
100%, because what you have, like, you have seraphim, you have cherubim, you have other classifications in the text. Some would argue that the designations of sons of God are beings that belong to the supernatural realm.
We're going to do an episode on the Nephilim.
No, not that. No, B'nai Elohim, not the Nephilim.
I'm saying later we will do one.
Oh, we will? Oh,
yeah,
gosh,
yeah,
okay.
That's a focus.
No, I'm talking about B'nai Elohim, where some would argue, right, that is a designation for beings that are proper to other worlds. You see this in Job chapter 1. So again, just reiterating that the Old Testament doesn't have just this binary of angels and demons. It has a taxonomy of beings, and that taxonomy of beings might be some sort of hierarchy in relationship to responsibility and function. And in light of that, think about this, in light of that, when the serpentine figure, when this serpent snake at the tree offers that if you partake of this fruit, you will be like God, this idea of being like God is to sort of not transgress, but overcome and rise beyond the limitations of an earthly and terrestrial existence, right? And so that the invitation is not simply one of you can be like God and that you can take his throne, or that it like with this malicious sort of cunning intent. No, it's an invitation, right? One reading here is that this serpentine figure is offering an invitation that is actually a divine invitation for the humans to actually choose and make an act of the will to partake into something that would actually enlighten them and move them forward. And for this to be framed as though this is the desire of God for them.
Oh,
right.
So, okay. So he's not like, we read it and it's like, come be a part of my rebellion. Come,
Yeah.
let's take down God. Instead, it's kind of like, hey, I'm an emissary of the Most High, and I have this offer. This is coming from him, from him to me, to you.
Yep.
And we want to invite you to come join the party. And
Yep.
Steve's like, oh, yeah, that sounds great.
Yep. And then the nuance of the text is that then the subtlety of it is that the invitation is not in keeping with what God has actually told them. God has said something to them. The invitation is according to what they see. So Eve sees that the fruit is good for wisdom. It's good for food. She sees the serpentine figure who is speaking, having this interaction with her. She sees it as an enlightened figure and thinks, oh, I can achieve and I can reach that if I just partake of this fruit. So the invitation is to partake in some sort of divine aspect by way of what you see, right? If you look at verse 6 of chapter 3. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husbands who was with her. So in that little verse right there, what the author is trying to communicate is that, listen, Eve was sensually tempted, meaning she was lured via her senses. Not sensual in the sense of adult play, but sensual in the sense of her senses. And this has a direct echo to when Jesus is in the wilderness and who appears? The enemy appears. And Paul tells us that the enemy can appear as an angel of light. And there are Christian traditions that understand that when the enemy appeared to Jesus in the wilderness, he appeared as an angel of light, right? We'll get that call later. He appeared as an angel of light. And this is why when the angel appears, this is why the enemy appears for Jesus in the wilderness. The question is, if you are the Son of God. Yeah. Why? Because as an emissary to serve the Son of God, he needed to know whether Jesus was in fact the Son of God that he was there to serve, and he needed some sort of proof. Yeah. So this is a way in wrapping up Jesus to live according to his sensual experience, by having him prove that he's the very recipient of God's emissary for him. You see the cunning there?
Yeah, absolutely. And this changes the way that I think about temptation, right? Because temptation often is like, oh, there's the devil in the red, pitchfork and the cape and all these things. And he offers you like, hey, I'll make you wealthy and I'll make you famous and really good at playing the guitar if you sell me your soul. And we think like this is how temptation comes. But the picture that's being painted both from this experience in the garden as well as with Jesus is that, no, it's not always quite like that. The real crux of temptation is this inclination to distrust what God has said and to go with what is what you are experiencing, as to use your language, sensually.
Yeah. And the contrast here, and you see it clearly sort of exemplified in Jesus in the wilderness, is that when he just says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That's what was missed in the fall. So when you read Genesis 3, 1 through 13, there's an invitation to partake in a new reality according to the senses, according to this interaction. And the fall is to actually live according to our sensual experience, divorced from the explicit word and command that has come before. Because your existence as a human is tethered and tied to the word of God. Because you only exist because God spoke it. The world is held together because the word spoke it. So that the existence of all reality is rooted on an agreement between like the material world and the power, then the word of his power. Right? This is where you start getting into these places where it's like, what? Like the world exists, all exists simply because he spoke it. That's the word of his power, according to Hebrews. So that the world that Eve lives in, although enchanted, is the world first created according to the word. And the invitation at the tree is this cunning of a serpentine figure who presents himself as something of a enlightened being who is inviting Eve into a more enlightened state via sensual living at the expense of the word of God. Eve is not realizing that that invitation is less than what she already has because God has spoken it.
This is what I find so interesting. I'm glad that you're kind of wandering in this direction. We only have a couple minutes left, so maybe briefly, but
sure.
I do notice here that the fall is much less of a rebellion and much more of a fall, and that's why we call it the fall. She was subject to temptation, or not to subject to deception and temptation, I guess. But there's a really interesting passage, and I think it's in 2 Timothy that talks about how Eve was deceived. She bought into the lie that the serpentine figure was offering, but it says, but Adam was not deceived. What's going on there?
Again, we don't have enough time to break it down, but just Adam as the figurehead, right? And again, this language of Adam as humanity, but Adam as the figurehead of humanity, that he perceived correctly that the invitation was an actual a fable. It was a cunningly devised fable to move him, but that there was this place where he hitched his wagon to his bride, right? So that there was a hope. Some traditions present, and this isn't explicit in the text, but there was a hopefulness within Adam to do the right thing in his conception of hitching himself to his bride, and that maybe God would see the sincerity of his heart, or some sort of redemptive element there. But that Adam was not deceived in seeing this serpentine figure as something other than an alternative to what God had spoken, right? And maybe it wasn't clear for him the road where this alternate road led.
Yeah, what the ramifications were.
Yeah, but that Adam was not deceived that this isn't quite it, right? But yet he did it because he hitched his wagon to Eve. I mean, we could do a whole episode on the sophistry of what the serpent did here, because once Eve partakes, it's a done deal. Like Adam doesn't even have to partake when you actually think it through, because all of a sudden death is in the world in some meaningful way. And now you have to redeem it, and it is
the whole counterfactual of what if Adam held his ground, and then now what with the story of redemption? How does that all work? Oh man!
But even then, there's already death, and so that then and remember that the whole point in the serpentine figure and the serpent's sort of cunning is not to have Adam fall. That's not the first and foremost. It's to cast aspersions against the character of God. Remember, that's the end goal. The end goal is to rebel against God, right? Now, we rebel against God by getting a foothold on the earth, but it's casting aspersions and sort of putting a shadow over the character of God, so that if Eve were to die and Adam had held strong, this counterfactual, well, then there's a claim to be able to say, as the enemy, the serpent, can say, oh, so you just let this woman die? So this is what you do to those who disobey you? If they don't, you just cut them off, or you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the government of God is cast under aspersion. And so you already have, it's a fascinating, there's so many more layers here.
Well, we don't have time for those layers, but what we will do is invite you to our Facebook community group where we're having conversations, I think, every day with the new episode dropping. And so there's so much else that we could explore. If you have questions about the text, observations, insights that maybe you want to share with us, we want to invite you over to the Facebook community group. The link to that community is in the description of every episode. We would love to have you guys over. Until then, we'll see you guys in the next episode.
All right, so we just want to shout out a awesome podcast that is transforming and changing lives. And the podcast is Death to Life. It's actually hosted by our buddy Richard Young. And within this podcast, you hear these awesome stories of people who received the gospel and who were once living in darkness and in death, and how in receiving the gospel, they went from death to life. It's long form, so they're an hour plus, an hour and a half plus, but it's powerful, powerful stories and powerful, powerful transformations. And you can find that podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever, Buzzsprout. Death to Life with Richard Young.
one of the things that I love about long form podcasts is that you can really just immerse yourself in a story.
Yeah.
We try our best to do these move episodes in 10 minutes. We say 10 minutes, but like, let's be real. We're not even close to that mark.
Not even close.
But long form podcasts give you so much depth to an experience and to a story. And there's something unique about stories, about being able to hear what God has done in the life of someone else, to hear the struggles, the way that they overcome, the way that God met them in that moment. I have personally benefited tremendously from listening to these stories, and I believe that you will too. So go give them a shot. Check it out. Death to Life with Richard Young. This is, by the way, this is not a paid advertisement at all. This is just something that we love, and we want to encourage you guys to go check it out. Maybe when Jonathan Leonardo's book finally lands, maybe we can get a paid advertisement from his book. By the way, that's a shout out. You're going to have a book coming out sometime.
Yeah, a couple months. Yeah, I think early February.
All right. Well, maybe we get to talk about it in early February and shout that out. But yeah, guys, go check it out. Death to Life with Richard Young, wherever you find your podcasts.